Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations.com. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at the Autumn Harvest Knit Pillow. This is an adorable little pillow with squirrels marching across the top and bottom, some color work at the very top and the very bottom, and of course, what is a squirrel without his or her nuts? So we have some little acorns going on too. To make this project, you're going to, of course, need the pattern. And then you will need Peyton's Classic Wool Worsted Yarn in navy, seafoam, pumpkin, yellow, and chestnut brown. You'll need a pair of size US 7 or 4.5 millimeter knitting needles, or size needed to obtain gauge. You will need a 20-inch square pillow form, and you will need 4 buttons. Let's also take a quick look at the back before we get started on the actual knitting. The back is worked in seed stitch, and this is an envelope style sham. So we have it knit in 2 pieces, and then we make the buttonholes, and then when you put the buttons on, you can insert the buttons in the buttonholes and keep your pillow covered. Now this is great for a couple of reasons. One is if the pillow case gets soiled, you can take it off and hand wash it, which is awesome. Alternatively, if the inside pillow gets old and shabby, because this is an heirloom pillow that you're going to keep forever, you can unbutton it, take it out, and put a new one in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual knitting. Now we have taken a look at the front of the knitting. Let's take a look at the chart. Now the entire front of the pillow is stocking stitch. So the instructions are incredibly important, and they say cast on 96 stitches and follow the chart. So you're going to cast on 96 stitches and you're going to follow the color work chart. So remember, knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. You're going to start the right side rows, you're going to start reading them from where their number is. So you're going to read them from right to left all the way across. When you're working the wrong side rows or the purl rows, you're going to start on the left-hand side and work left to right. This is so that the colors stack up on top of each other in the way that they should. Now that little red line is for me. I'm just going to knit a small swatch today in the interest of not having every row that I knit take 1,200 hours, so I'm just going to do a little swatch. So that red line is just for me. That won't be on your chart when you download it. And you may notice a couple of things. One is, even though there are 5 colors in this pillow, you only ever have 2 colors in a row. So do not be afraid that you're going to be juggling 5 colors at once. You will not be. So the only tricky part about knitting color work like this, which is the second point that I wanted to make, is what happens on the wrong side or the back of the work. So when you're knitting along, and you are finished with one color and you're going to knit the next color, the unused yarn has to track from one side of the stitches to the other. This yarn, anything that goes on the wrong side of the work and is not being knit with, is called a float. So you want your float to lay flat across the back of the work. You don't want it too tight or the work will pucker up like this and be incredibly unattractive. And you don't want it loosey-goosey, because that way you will get holes and gaps in your work. So this is what the wrong side of the work is going to look like with the floats. And once again, you can see there's only 2 colors at a time. You never have an instance in which all 5 colors are floating at the same time. Now, one of the things it says on this pattern in the beginning under notes is, when working from the chart, carry color not in use loosely across wrong side of work, that's the float, but never more than 5 stitches. When it must pass over more than 5 stitches, weave it over and under the color not in use at center point of the stitches it passes over. So if you need to track it across 7, you'll weave it at the 4th. If it's 9, then the 5th, etc. Now, even if you're not going over 5 stitches, it's not a twist so much as a way of starting a new color and ending an old color. And you're going to do it consistently all the way across the work, and as long as you do it the same way all the way across, you'll be fine and you're not going to have any holes. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to tell you new under old. Every time we're going to change color, I'm going to tell you new color under old color, new color under old color, and that will make sure that you are doing it consistently throughout your work. So let's All right, so in my first color work row, I'm going to work in the seafoam and the pumpkin. I'm going to knit 6 in the seafoam, then 3 pumpkin, then 6 seafoam, then 3 pumpkin. I'm going to do that all the way across to the end, but again, for the sake of my piece, I'm only going 31 stitches because I didn't want the row to be too long. Now, 6 is more than 5, so generally speaking, we're going to have a twist, but we're not going to have one in the very first 6 stitches because there's nothing to twist it with quite yet. To start with the new color at the very beginning, I'm just going to pick a fold 6 to 8 inches in from the end because I can weave that in later. And one of the nice things about the Peyton's Classic Wool Worsted is because it has such a high wool content. It's what we call a sticky yarn. It still has, it's going to stick to each other a little bit. It's not going to be so smooth like a cotton or a bamboo that it will be slick. And having yarn with a little bit of tactile grip makes color work that much easier because it helps the colors stay more even. Now after my 6 seafoam, I need 3 pumpkin. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the seafoam at the beginning. I'm just going to leave a 6 to 8 inch strand hanging and start knitting with a fold. I'm going to tighten up that stitch by weaving in the ends later. There's my 3 pumpkin. Now I'm going to do 6 seafoam because 6 is more than 5. I want to twist halfway through. So let's take a look at that. New color under old color. So in this case, pumpkin is my old color because that's the one I was knitting with. Seafoam is my new color because that's the one I'm going to knit with. New color under old. So I'm going to take the seafoam and make sure it is under the pumpkin yarn. So I'm going to knit 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to give these 2 yarns a little twist. I'm going to put the pumpkin over the seafoam, new color under old. In this case, it's not a new color because I'm still going, but I'm still going to remember that the color I'm about to knit with goes under. I'm going to knit 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Now it's time for the pumpkin. Let's take one more look at the back, which has been traveling along. So now new color under old. The color I'm about to knit with goes under the color that's already hanging out. New color under old. Going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. Once again, making sure that the floats lay flat, are not too tight and not too loose. That one's a tad bit loose for me. I'm just gonna tighten it up a tiny bit with my finger. You will develop a rhythm. It's slow going at first, but you will absolutely develop a rhythm as you keep knitting. Let's do 6 more seafoam. Once again, new under old, seafoam under pumpkin. We have to knit 6, but we're going to knit 3 and twist. 2, 3. Twist by bringing the pumpkin on top of the seafoam. 1, 2, 3, new under old, knit 3 in pumpkin. Once again, don't tug too tight, don't leave it too loose. 2, 3, and in my case I only have 4 seafoam left, so I'm just going to go ahead and knit that to the end. Once again, my swatch is smaller than your row will be. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the end of row 3. You can see I have 2 colors up on the needle. And you can see my floats are laying nice and flat across the back. So let's take a look at the wrong side row. So on the wrong side rows, we're going to purl and we're going to work from the left hand part of the chart to the right hand part of the chart. So you would begin with purl 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, seafoam, purl 5 pumpkin, purl 4 seafoam, purl 5 pumpkin, purl 4 seafoam, etc. I'm starting over here. where my red line is because that's where my swatch is. So I'm going to purl 3 seafoam, 5 pumpkin, 4 seafoam, 5 pumpkin, 4 seafoam, 5 pumpkin, seafoam to the end. So I'm purling now because I'm on the wrong side. So in my case it's 3, in your case it will be 4. Now I have a seafoam stitch on my needle, but I'm going to knit in the pumpkin, and I want new color under old color. So I'm going to cross the seafoam on top of the pumpkin. Pumpkin is my new color, so it is under the old color. Bring that up. I'm going to purl 5. 1, 2, and I don't have to twist because it's a 5-stitch float, not a 6-stitch float. 4, 5. And then I need to bring my seafoam under. New color under old. Seafoam under pumpkin. And I'm going to purl 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's purl 5 pumpkin. New color under old. Make sure it's laying nice and flat, not too tight, not too loose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. New color under old. Seafoam under pumpkin. Purl 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. New color under old, pumpkin under seafoam. Consistency is the name of the game on making this work nicely. Now this stitch is going to be a little loosey-goosey because it's from the tail, it's just hanging out. Once again, I will tighten that up when I am weaving in ends. And for the last time on this row, new under old, seafoam under pumpkin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, here's my working yarn. Once again, nice flat floats. Now, periodically, one of the things that may happen, and it's not happening to me today, which is unusual, one of the things that can happen sometimes is that the two colors of yarn that you're working with while you're working will get twisted with each other. Sometimes it's worth it every couple of rows to just untwist by hand, just take one of the balls of yarn and untwist it around the other. It happens primarily when there is more twisting in one direction than the other. As long as you're twisting about the same amount coming back and forth, it'll twist going forward and untwist coming back. But it's not wrong if periodically you have to stop and untwist the yarns to make them easier to work with. Now moving on to the next row. So the next row, 3, 4, we did row 3 going that way, we did row 4 coming back. So we're on row 5. Row 5 is exactly the same as row 4 from a color work perspective. So instead of having to count, in my brain, all I need to do is say, if it's seafoam, work the stitch in seafoam. If it's pumpkin, work the stitch in pumpkin. And that's going to happen for row 5, row 6, and row 7. They are all the same as row 4. So I'm going to go ahead and knit those 3 rows. But again, I don't have to go crazy counting, because I know if I see seafoam, I'm going to knit or purl in seafoam. If I see pumpkin, I'm going to knit or purl in pumpkin. So those are going to be very easy to do. Once again, you want to just keep the floats consistent. I know that I am repeating that over and over, but that is the only even vaguely tricky part of this pillow. New under old. New under old. Oop, that was a float, not the working yarn. It does get easier when your work is a little taller. You are less likely to get caught up in tails. New under old. New under old. So seafoam under the pumpkin. Whoops, made an inadvertent yarn over there. We don't need that. All right. Here we go. You can see our little acorns are starting to shape up. And you're seeing all of my nice, neat floats in the back. So let's talk a minute about floating yarn up the sides of the work. Now, since I used navy in the first couple of rows and I don't use it again until up here, I'm going to take that navy, I'm going to cut a 6 to 8 inch tail to weave in later, and I'm going to start with navy anew when I come up here. It looks like that is a, let's see, I'm going to need that on 14, so I'll need the yarn up here. So it'll be 14 uses navy, 15 uses navy, 16 uses navy. Now 17 and 18 do not, but 19 does again. Because that's only 2 rows, I'm not going to cut off the yarn. After row 16, I'm going to leave it hanging, and I'll just track it up the 2 rows up the side. Again, as with everything else that we're doing, not too tight and not too loose, but I'd like to avoid having 18 trillion ends to weave in at the middle. When I get through row 21, again, I'm not going to use the navy again until way up here when the squirrels are done. So I'm going to cut the navy at that point and leaving a 6 to 8 inch tail to weave in, and then I'll join it again up here where I need it. So you do not need to track the yarn up the side every time. And if there's a large section of rows that do not use that color, I strongly advise you cut it and leave yourself an end to weave in later. However, if it's just an instance of a couple of rows, then go ahead and let it track up the side. It'll save you some weaving in at the very end. So you're going to continue along and follow the chart, and that's really all you need to do for the front of this pillow. Keep your color work nice and even, and you're working in stocking stitch, and just count along with the chart. When you get to the top of the chart, you're done with the front. All right, I want to take a quick look at the stitch pattern for the back half of the pillow. It's right here on the first page of the instructions. It's a variation on the seed stitch, which, as you know, is a combination of knits and purls. Now, when you make it for your pillow, you're going to use the navy, but I made us a small sample in seafoam because I think it's easier for you to see on camera. Sometimes on those dark colors, you can't really see the stitch definition that we're looking for. So this is a 4 row repeat on an even number of stitches. So the first 2 rows are knit 1, purl 1, all the way across. And of course, I'm just using a small swatch. You will cast on the 90 stitches as you're told in the pattern. So you're going to knit the back in 2 pieces, and one side is going to have buttonholes on it, and there is a 2x2 ribbed edge at the end of these short pieces, and that will overlap when you assemble the pillow. So this is my second row of the knit one, purl one. So what will start to happen after 2 rows, if you look very closely, you'll see it starts to look like ribbing. But after that second row is done, we are staggering the placement. So for the 3rd and 4th rows of the pattern, instead of starting knit 1, purl 1, we're going to start purl 1, knit 1. And that keeps it from being a ribbing, and that gives you the variation on the seed stitch. Gives you that nice texture, but it's just a little bit different. Now you're sitting home and you're knitting your back and you put your work down and you can't remember whether you are working the same row as the row below or it's time to change. What I like to do is mark one side of the work. So in this case, I would put a stitch marker or a sticker or whatever and just mark this side of the work that has the tail on the right hand side. And so when I pick the work up, if I know that the tail is on the right hand side, like the row that we just made, I know that I am changing the stitching so it does not match the row below. If I'm looking at the side that does not have the stitcher or the marker, the stitch marker or any other kind of mark, I know that I am doing exactly the same row as before. So I look at that, it looks like it needs to be purled, so I'm going to purl it. And this helps you when you put your work down. You remember what row you're on when you pick it back up. Because once again, if you lose track of your rows, you're either going to get a smaller seed stitch, which is the 1 by 1, and it doesn't have the variation that we have here, or you wind up with ribbing, which we don't want until the edge. So I highly recommend marking one side of the work. And we're not going to call it right side, wrong side in the pattern because it really isn't a right side or a wrong side. This is a reversible stitch and it looks the same on both sides. All right, so there is our pattern for the backs. After you have done as much of this pattern as is called for, you're going to switch to a 2 by 2 ribbing, and then we're going to put on some buttonholes. So I'm going to make just a couple of rows of the 2 by 2 ribbing so you can see what I'm doing, and then we'll talk about the buttonhole. All right, so here is a little bit of 2 by 2 ribbing. And so let's talk about the bind off. You're going to knit or purl the specified number of stitches that it tells you to do, and then you're going to cast off 4 stitches. So let's just cast off these 2. So I'm going to go 1, 2, I'm going to cast that one off, that's 1. I'm going to purl the next stitch and bring that stitch over, that's 2. Purl the next stitch, that's 3. Knit the next stitch. So you're going to knit, even during the bind off, you're going to knit and purl the stitches in as they appear. And then whatever you get left with, you will work those off as they appear. So there is the beginning of my buttonhole. Coming back on the next row, I'm going to have to cast on 4 stitches to make up for that little gap. And I will just incorporate them into the existing knit 2, purl 2 ribbing pattern. So let's take a look and see how that looks. So knit, now there's not a lot of cast-ons that you can go with in this direction, particularly since you only have 1 strand. So I'm going to use the cursive E cast on. But one thing I will tell you is you need to make this nice and tight, because the cursive E cast on as a matter of course tends to loosen up. So all you're going to do is use your thumb and make a twist and put the twist on the right hand needle. So 1, 2, let's get my cable out of the way, 3, but again really tight because they naturally loosen up as you're stitching, so you don't want them to be all floppy. And then I'm going to knit or purl the remaining stitches as they appear. Using cursive E is possibly the only time I will ever tell you to knit tight on purpose. So now on the next row, again, you'll follow along the written instructions, whether it's a row that you'd begin with knits or purls, but you're keeping everything in knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. So it's a simple matter to read your stitches. So I just did purl 2. So my next 2 stitches are going to be knit 2. I'm going to knit into these cast on stitches. And again, they're tight on purpose. If you just slide them down to the point of the needle, they're easier to get in. 1. And see, as soon as you get one off, they start to loosen up, and that's why we pulled them tight to begin with. Oops, split the ply. 2, and now I'm going, since I just did 2 knits, I will do 2 purls. There's 1, whoops, purl, and there's my last one, 2, and then next would be a knit, which is exactly as it appears. All right, and there's my buttonhole. Very simple to do, and again, the pattern will tell you exactly where to place them. At that point, I would block the front particularly, but block everything so that the stitching is all even. You will overlap the back pieces to match the front, like I said, so that the rib sections match, and you will sew that all together around the outside. And then you're going to put the buttons opposite the buttonhole so you can easily change out your pillows. Thank you so much for joining us here on Yarnspirations.com as we took a stroll through the Autumn Harvest Knit Pillow. I hope you have a great time making your little squirrels and acorns. This will be a terrific heirloom piece that you can keep forever. We look forward to seeing you again real soon.